The night was silent, too silent. In a small African village, the only sounds were the whispers of the wind through the trees and the distant laughter of children playing under the moonlight. But something was coming, something that would shatter their lives forever. Shadows moved along the horizon, strange figures with horses and weapons. No one knew why they had come, only that terror had arrived. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers gripped whatever they could as a weapon. And in the darkness, women and girls disappeared into the night, never to return the same. For over 1,000 years, African women lived in vibrant communities, rich with music, stories, and traditions passed down through generations. They tended their families, cultivated fields, and celebrated life through dance and song. Each village had its own rhythm, a harmony of human life intertwined with the land. The air was full of laughter, the markets buzzed with trade, and every home had its stories. But as the centuries unfolded, a shadow began to creep across these lands. Traders from distant deserts appeared along the coasts and rivers. They were not like ordinary merchants. They carried with them chains, fear, and the promise of a life stolen. It began with whispers, families noticing strangers watching, unusual caravans moving silently at night, rumors of raids in nearby villages. Then came the first strike. The raiders moved swiftly, like predators hunting prey. Women and girls were taken from their homes, often torn from sleeping families while the rest could only scream and watch helplessly. The sudden violence left villages in shock. Mothers tried to hide their daughters, wrapping them in blankets, burying them under the earth, praying that the strangers would pass. Fathers fought, but often they were outnumbered, outmatched, or captured themselves. For the captured women, the horror began immediately. They were stripped of familiar clothes, their hair bound, their faces covered. Names, once symbols of identity, were replaced with numbers or foreign labels. Each step toward the waiting caravans was a step away from everything they had ever known: home, family, language, memory. Some whispered prayers to the ancestors. Others clutched each other, trembling in fear. The journey was brutal. Under the scorching sun and freezing nights, women walked for miles across deserts, rivers, and barren lands. Water was scarce, food even scarcer. Some collapsed along the way, their cries ignored by the indifferent captors. The caravan moved relentlessly, leaving a trail of suffering that no one could erase. Children and mothers were separated without warning, and sisters were sold to strangers, their fates unknown. As the caravans reached the slave markets, another layer of cruelty awaited. Here, women were displayed like objects, judged for youth, beauty, strength, or obedience. Buyers examined them closely, unaware or uncaring of the lives they were destroying. Each selection tore another piece of a woman's identity. Families were broken, names forgotten, and histories erased. Unlike the Atlantic slave trade, which often left a trace of descendants, the Arab slave trade systematically aimed to erase memory. Women were not just taken, they were meant to vanish from history itself. Many women ended up in harems or households far from their homelands. Some were forced to serve in ways that crushed the spirit, while others learned to navigate a world of silence, secrecy, and survival. The system was designed not to remember, not to leave evidence, and not to honor lives lost. It was a machinery of erasure, yet amid this suffering, stories persisted. A mother whispered her child's name in the dead of night, hoping the echo would reach distant lands. Women shared secret words, songs, and rituals among themselves, keeping fragments of their identity alive. Each tiny act of remembrance was a rebellion against the forces that sought to erase them. The impact was immense. Villages that once thrived were emptied of women. Cultures were fractured. Generations were affected. But outside the deserts and markets, the world remained largely unaware. History books rarely mentioned these women, and when they did, the stories were vague, statistical, or coldly factual. Millions of women suffered in silence, their lives absorbed into the shadows of history. And so, the story of the Arab slave trade begins, not with numbers, dates, or treaties, but with the terrified faces of women who vanished in the night, whose laughter, names, and dreams were stolen. For those who remained, for those who survived, the challenge was not only to endure, but to remember even when history itself tried to forget them. Some would survive, some would adapt, and some would perish. But all were part of a system built to erase them. The next chapter would take us deeper, through the deserts, the markets, and the endless struggle to survive against a world that refused to see them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories from history straight to you. Stay tuned for more epic tales. After the raids, the women were forced into long caravans moving away from their homelands. Some walked barefoot, others were tied together with ropes so no one could escape. The land slowly changed. Green fields disappeared, trees became rare. Ahead lay deserts that seemed endless, silent, and cruel. Days blended into nights. The sun burned skin during the day, and the cold cut deep after sunset. Water was tightly controlled. A single mistake, a stumble, or weakness could mean being left behind. Those who collapsed were often abandoned where they fell. The caravan never stopped for the dead. For many women, this journey was worse than chains. It was a slow breaking of the body and the mind. Hunger hollowed their faces. Thirst cracked their lips until they bled. Sleep came in short, painful moments, filled with nightmares of home. Every step carried them further away from everything familiar. Some women tried to remember the faces of their families. Others repeated their own names in silence, afraid that if they stopped, even that would disappear. Language became useless. The captors spoke words the women could not understand. Orders were given with whips, gestures, and violence. Children suffered the most. Young girls cried for their mothers until their voices faded. Older women tried to protect them, sharing small sips of water or shielding them from blows. But kindness was dangerous. Showing weakness could invite punishment. Weeks or months later, the caravans reached the markets. Slave markets were loud, crowded places. They smelled of dust, sweat, and fear. Here, the women were lined up and inspected. Buyers looked at teeth, skin, hands, and eyes. Age mattered. Beauty mattered. Obedience mattered. Humanity did not. Women were priced like goods. A young girl might be sold quickly. An older woman might be rejected, resold, or sent on another journey. Families that had survived the desert together were torn apart here. Sisters were separated. Mothers watched their daughters taken away forever. Names were erased completely. Buyers gave new names, often meaningless sounds that replaced years of identity. Language, religion, and memory were expected to disappear as well. The goal was not only control, but transformation, to turn a living person into something owned. This system was different from the Atlantic slave trade in a crucial way. In the Atlantic world, enslaved people were often forced into labor and reproduction. Their descendants still exist today. But in the Arab slave trade, many women were prevented from having children. The system aimed to leave no future generations who could remember or speak. Because of this, there are few family lines, few oral histories, and few physical traces. No large communities remain to tell the story from within. Silence became the final outcome. Some women were taken into wealthy households. Others were sent to distant cities they had never heard of. A few were trained for specific roles, but all lived under constant control. Escape was nearly impossible. Resistance brought severe punishment. Yet even in this controlled world, women found small ways to survive. A glance shared with another captive. A song hummed quietly at night. A memory repeated in the heart. These were fragile acts, but they mattered. Outside the markets, life continued as normal. Cities grew, trade flourished, empires expanded. The suffering of these women was hidden behind walls, written out of records, or justified as tradition. Over time, the world forgot to ask where these women went. Historians later struggled to reconstruct the truth. Records were scattered, incomplete, or written by those in power. Women's voices were missing. Their pain was reduced to numbers, if mentioned at all. But absence itself tells a story. Where were the daughters? Where were the grandchildren? Why did entire communities vanish without trace? The answer lies in a system designed not just to enslave, but to erase. By the time the markets closed and the caravans faded, millions of African women had passed through this machinery. Most left no graves, no memorials, no written words, only silence. And behind that silence, lives that mattered. What happened after the markets was not freedom nor rest. It was a long life, lived in shadows, unseen, unrecorded, and forgotten by history. In the final part, we will enter that silent world and ask why remembering these women today matters more than ever. After the markets, the women disappeared from public view. They were taken into homes, palaces, and private spaces where no records were kept. Some were sent to distant cities. Others crossed seas they had never imagined. Their lives continued, but in silence. No one asked them to tell their stories. No one planned to remember them. Inside households, control was constant. Every movement was watched, every word measured. Many women lived without ever seeing the outside world again. Time lost meaning. Days were marked not by seasons or festivals, but by commands and routines. For some, survival meant learning a new language, forgetting an old one, adopting customs that were not their own. Memory became dangerous. The past was a wound that could not be spoken aloud. Most were never allowed to build families. The system was designed this way. Without children, there would be no future voices. Without descendants, there would be no one to pass down names, stories, or pain. When these women died, their histories died with them. This is why the Arab slave trade left so little behind. No large communities, no shared memory, no living proof that could stand up and say, "This happened to us." And so history moved on. Books were written, empires rose and fell. Scholars focused on wars, kings, and trade routes. The women existed only in margins, if they existed at all. Their suffering was treated as a footnote, not a central truth. But silence does not mean absence. Every empty village, every broken lineage, every missing generation tells the story of what was taken. The absence of descendants is not a mystery. It is evidence. Some women resisted in quiet ways. They refused to forget their real names, even if they never spoke them aloud. They kept memories alive in their minds. A mother's face, a song from childhood, a smell of home after rain. These memories were acts of survival. Others found ways to care for one another, teaching, protecting, sharing small kindnesses in a world built to erase compassion. These acts did not change the system, but they preserved humanity. Centuries later, historians began to look again. They noticed the gaps. They asked why certain regions lost women at unnatural rates. They studied travel records, court documents, and personal accounts. Slowly, a picture emerged, incomplete, fragmented, but undeniable. Millions of African women had been absorbed into a system that did not want them remembered. This is why there are no monuments. This is why there are no large memorials. This is why their story feels unfamiliar, even shocking today. The tragedy is not only what happened to them, but that the world allowed them to disappear without question. Remembering them now is not about blame alone. It is about truth. It is about restoring humanity to those who were denied it. It is about acknowledging that history is not just made by those who leave records, but also by those who are silenced. When we tell these stories, we break that silence. We give names back to the nameless. We give presence to the erased. We turn absence into memory. The Arab slave trade did not just take lives. It took futures. It took voices. It took generations that never came to be. And yet, by remembering, we do something powerful. We refuse to let silence be the final word. History is not only written in monuments and books. Sometimes it is written in what is missing. And when we listen closely to that silence, we hear the voices of women who were never meant to be remembered, but must be. Thank you for watching.